Welcome to the No Quit Living podcast. Our primary objective is to motivate and inspire our listeners to never quit. The reality of life is simple. We all fall. We all fail. At times, we get knocked down. The question is, do we get back up? Are we stronger? Are we better prepared to attain the maximum of our potential? Thank you for joining our No Quit tribe. As you go for your greatness today, never quit. And remember, we rise by lifting others up. Welcome to episode number 350 of the No Quit Living podcast. I'm your host, Christopher J. Worth, and today's theme of the day is culture. Our quote of the day comes to us from Jim Boone. You don't create culture with signs and slogans. You create culture with people and leadership. If you miss going to live events, we would love for you to join us on Saturday, May 14th in Eastchester, New York. We are putting together a one-of-a-kind event to help take your personal and or professional life to the next level. For information or tickets, please shoot me a message at chris@noquitliving.com. Today's guest happens to be a good friend of mine that I initially met and reached out to after I read his book, High 10. When it comes to culture, Martin Rooney definitely gets it. I know you will enjoy today's episode. Martin, I'd like to welcome you to the No Quit Living podcast.
Hey, Chris, great to be here. And for anybody listening, we have just talked for about an hour straight until we finally said, man, we need to tape this thing because we're missing too much good material. But great to be here. But if anybody has seen the Step Brothers movie, I think I just found my new best friend.
There's a good friend of mine, Johnny L. Sasser. We talk about Step Brothers movie all the time. So I literally asked Martin that about 10 minutes ago. I was like, have you ever seen the movie Step Brothers? And he's like, did we just become best friends? So the first question I ask everybody is, are you ready to positively impact at least one person today? And I'm not asking that to you because A, I know you're ready, and B, I know that what you talk about and what you're doing and the amazing stuff, it's not one, it's multiple people. So I'm going to switch over to my first real question for you is your no quit question. And I'm curious if you either have a no quit story of your own or perhaps a personal or professional challenging time where you could have given up or given in, but you didn't.
Well, and it's funny you say that, Chris, because we were talking before, and hey, without a doubt, everybody's got their own personal stories in their life. But the one that resonates with me the most right now is with my daughter. And we were explaining before where she's going to school. I'll tell everybody that in a second. But my daughter is a pretty high-level track and field athlete. I've been her coach since she was little. And I'll tell you what, for everybody listening, if you're a parent or you're a coach, these last 2 years have not been easy, right? Like I've been making my kid this promise that if we just kept working and we kept sticking with it, something great was going to happen. And her junior year got completely shut down. So there was no junior year spring track. And I remember at one point the tracks were closed. We had nowhere to run. And she said, Dad, what are we going to do? And this is a great line. This became our mantra for essentially the last year and a half. And I said, her name is Sophia. And I said, Sophia, we can either lighten up or we can tighten up, buddy. And that's what I call her is buddy. And I said, buddy, we can either run at the track, we'll run at the street. If we can't go to the gym, we'll lift in our house. We're going to do more now. This isn't an obstacle. This is an opportunity because think of every kid that's not going to push forward now if we really go. And I'll tell you what, usually I traveled and that was over and she became my most important athlete in the whole world. And we worked. And this season, she went to the national championship. She just competed in Oregon at Hayward Field. But the greatest, most shining moment, because she had a dream, right? And for everybody listening, we have a goal sheet on her door. She has a vision board of her dream school that she wanted to attend. And I'm not going to lie, I started to get really scared, right? Like thinking maybe it's not going to happen. There was no more recruiting. You couldn't visit schools. And there was one night she screamed and my wife ran upstairs and then I ran upstairs and they were both crying. And I thought, the dream is over. Like, man, how are we going to overcome this? And she just handed me her phone and it said, hey, tell all the other schools they're out. Welcome to the Fighting Irish in Notre Dame. And it was the greatest group family hug we've had. But what I'm saying is it all comes back to no quit. where I can't imagine a bigger obstacle for a 16-year-old kid at the time. No prom, no high school, no seeing your friends. But I'll tell you what, now, because we're leaving, as you and I, we talked about, we're leaving in a week or so to take her there. That was my greatest, or at least the most recent amazing no quit story in my head, that I am so glad we didn't give up on it when maybe a lot of people did.
We can lighten up, or tighten up. And I think that's a fascinating story too, because you talk about something that everybody had to deal with, and that is things being shut down. So if you were an athlete, if you were somebody that would go to a library, if you were somebody that would go to a job, it got shut down. And at that point, you have one of two choices. You make the best out of it, or you just sit and go down that rabbit hole of woe is me and I can't do it. And I know so many people that are fitness buffs and not trying to get recruited, but just do it for their own mental health and their own fitness, and their gyms were canceled. I started going to a track, and for the first couple of weeks, there was no problems. And then, there was locks everywhere, and it's like, all right, what do? You find a parking lot somewhere, you find a street somewhere, do it in your house. Obviously, every single fitness company was sold out beyond belief, just because everybody was like, all right, we can't go anywhere. The only way to do it is online. So congratulations to your daughter. I think that is super exciting. Fun question we ask each guest, and I'm really interested in your answers. If you had to define yourself, but you could only use one word, what word would you pick?
Well, this one, and I guess somebody's got to, I'll tone it down a little, but I'll explain the story first, then I'll hear it. And when I was a athlete at the New York Athletic Club, which is a pretty prestigious club in the world, one of the originals, I was on the judo team there. And they said, man, that Martin, he's only got two speeds, asleep or ferocious, right? And I guess the word that I would use, though, versus ferocious would be driven. And I don't know what it is. There was never a pinpoint event, but I'm just really driven. I wake up and there are just things that I want to achieve. And I don't know. And I guess the opposite of that maybe would be mediocrity, right? Like I just don't want that to happen. So I'm a driven guy, whether it's being on this podcast, whether it's my workout of the day, being with my kids, or running my business. And man, and when something really interests me, nothing can stop me from pursuing that. And yeah, we hear the word drive, right? Like they got to have drive. And I think that is sometimes the missing ingredient, right? Like when parents talk to me about their children and, hey, how do I make my kid a good athlete? I usually say that it's a component of a few things. And number one, hey, do you have supportive parents? Number two, hey, do you have the right coaches around them? Number three, do you have the resources to be able to do what it is you want to do? But the fourth most important ingredient, that the other three don't matter, is that athlete driven to do what you want them to do, right? Like, is it your dream or is it their dream? And if it's their dream and they've got the drive for it, man, that's hard to stop in a world today where there aren't often that many driven people. So, I haven't been asked that one, but hopefully that was a good answer.
No, it was a fantastic answer, because it was real, and that's one of the reasons I like that question is, most people don't get asked it because it's kind of a quirky question, but I think it has a lot of ownership in the sense of who the person is, and I think your story and why you said it was awesome. So the word culture, you and I think for the hour we spoke before, we probably spent about 45 minutes talking about it. But your new book, High 10, and your prior book to that, Coach to Coach, first of all, both of them were fantastic. But your book, High 10, the subtitle is an inspiring story about building great team culture. And maybe a difficult question to ask, but maybe if you could sum it up, what does culture mean to you, or what do you think the value of culture is to a team, organization, or a family?
Wow. Well, I'll answer the second one first because that's easier. And the value of culture, I would put the word priceless on it. So, to be part of an incredible team where you just feel it, you feel that energy, everybody on the same page and something great happening, or the same thing, what would it be worth to somebody to be in their job or their workplace and just love being there every day because of either the environment or the energy that would be kicked off. And I think it's something that we all quest for, even right down into our own homes, right? So it's interesting because culture, at first, I think everybody hears the word and they'll say, yeah, culture, I get it. Oh yeah, I understand what that is. But when I really started to dive deep into it, that's the first piece, right? You have to define clearly what it means to you, and not to give away, but from the book, in my studies and what I really tried to do after first reading as many books as I could on the subject and experimenting with the ideas with my businesses and teams, what I really realized is that, as you know from reading the book, the 3 Bs, I really came down to that culture is just a component of the beings or your people, right? Because you can't have a culture without people. If you're just a one-man show, there is no culture, right? So you got to at least have 2 people to have a culture between you. And then it's your behaviors and your beliefs. And so what I say is culture, this is a pretty cool, I guess, definition, is it's the expressions of your beliefs through your through your being's behaviors. And that would be the way I would shorten it really down to every interaction or everything that happens with a culture is some composite of those 3 things. And that was, and I said it really quick, but that took me about 10 years to figure out, and hopefully it makes sense. But on a cultural level, you're either if there are problems or things aren't great, you got to either assess your people, the behaviors that those people are performing, or the belief system of your organization or the people that work for you. And once you understand that and look through that, I call it like a cultural lens, stuff starts to get really, really easy to see. And as you know, Chris, as soon as somebody starts thinking like that, everything you see is culture because everything is an interaction of people. So that would be my long-winded short version.
No, and I think that it's so poignant how you defined it that way, because it really epitomizes not only the book but the type of work you do. And I think it's interesting how I think people throw out the terms, what is the mission statement for our company? What is our motto? What is our tagline? And I don't want to minimize any of those because I think they are valuable and they're important, but for me, it's deeper when you look at the culture and what is the culture of a team, an organization, a charity. And I think when you actually do some of that real work and take a look in that, what I call the self-accountability mirror of your team, company, organization's culture, that's where you usually identify 1 or 2 or 3 areas. And I think the work is hard, but I think when you do the work as a team or an organization, it's invaluable because you find where our weakness is. You even strengthen more, your strong points or your really core, strengths that you use against competition and others. But I have to ask you, is it from your sports background or is it more along the lines of everything that really got you into culture? Because I think based on our conversation, it's something that clearly you've studied directly and probably indirectly for a long time now.
Yeah, and that's a great question. What I would say if I were to think about it is sports is where it started without a doubt, meaning just because I was involved in sports since I was a little kid. And I guess you're always getting a taste of being on good teams, not good teams, good coaches, bad coaches. So business, I didn't get involved in business and then as a business owner, obviously, until after college and then much later in my life. So what I would say is maybe sport at least gave me exposure to it, but business is where I really had to develop it. And having built a couple of companies, man, the culture of those was everything. And those were my first exposures to the concepts of mission statements and, core valued meetings and weekend courses and mentorships and workshops. And I don't know, but it became something that not only did I get interested in, but I realized, hey, do I know a lot about the sports I coach or fitness? Of course, but that's compulsory. If you're in that industry, you need to know that. Where I started to understand why I was successful was because I was building a great culture of the organizations that was places people wanted to work or people wanted to work together to win. And that's when I started to distill out those ideas, started speaking on it, and that led to the book. So I guess the short answer would be sports was my exposures, but business is where I really not only learned to engineer it, but how to hone it. And as you know, having read the book, all of those concepts are in there because it's not just a sport book like Coach to Coach. This one is a business book too.
Well, I don't want to challenge you, but I will say Coach to Coach is not just a sports book. There's some incredibly powerful things. And not to digress for a second, but one of the things that really hit me, and as I shared with you, I just finished Coach to Coach this morning. So I not only did I love it, but I had to get Coach to Coach because I really enjoyed High 10. But one of the things you talked about in Coach to Coach is, and I forget the exact words you use, but the foot on your back, where the difference of patting someone on the back versus, kicking someone in the butt. And I think that, to me, as a former high school and college coach and AAU coach as well, is that something that you can't teach somebody. You can't say, okay, Martin, based on, having 12, 19-year-olds in your team, statistically 11 of them are going to be, a pat on the back guy. But that goes back to the culture word. So my point about how it's not just a sports book, that very specific thing, I think correlates to any area in life. And you want to go back to talking about your daughter and this last challenging year. I'm sure there were lots of times where she needed a pat on the back, but there were plenty of times where, she needed a kick in the butt to say, hey, you talked about this goal, you have your vision board. So I think it's really, really valuable how you did that. So I'm going to throw out just another recommendation for any of our listeners. I don't care sports or not, business or not. Coach to Coach is a fantastic book. It's a quick read. And High 10 is another fantastic book. It's a little bit longer, but it really breaks down a bunch of stuff about a team, a company's culture. Maybe interesting, or maybe a little bit of a difficult question, but I get asked this quite often when I'm working with teams or companies. They say, Chris, what's a good question to ask? So is there one good question that a manager or a boss or an executive could ask their team or their executive team about culture, and maybe identifying where there might be a weakness that they need to kind of revamp?
Well, I guess, and obviously reading the book, there's an entire assessment that goes in there. And I think maybe it would be, and obviously the first part of it is just sitting down and individually just talking to somebody or interviewing them about their job is probably so rare it doesn't even exist, right? Like the only time things happen would probably be you sit down for a quarterly eval and you hear about all the stuff you're not doing, which is probably a culture killer in itself. But I think it would be like we talked about, hey, breaking bread, you take somebody to lunch and there might be a bunch of questions. But first one might be, hey, do you enjoy working here? Or do you enjoy the people that you work with? And I think those would be two of the biggest questions, because if those people don't say yes to those two, then you already know there is a cultural problem, and you better fix it really quick. And a personal example of that, before I ever got into private business, I was a physical therapist. So I was an orthopedic therapist. I worked at a privately owned practice in Westfield, New Jersey. They were called Twinborough. And here's the thing. I loved those guys. We had like the greatest culture. There was a guy, Larry and Jim, and if they ever hear this, they'll love it. And we just had so much fun, and they were my mentors, and every day was so much fun. But I want everybody to hear this. You ready? But I didn't really like being a therapist. I didn't enjoy, that's not what I wanted to do. I wasn't impacting enough people. There was stress. You're doing insurance paperwork all night. The job part I hated, but the culture was awesome. And here's what's really neat about that, because I'm having a breakthrough, because I didn't write about any of that stuff in the book. But here's the thing. I knew pretty early, Chris, I didn't want to do that, but I stayed for years because the culture was so awesome. And that, if that's not a trump card of like how important the culture is compared to what the work is or what you do, I don't know what is. And I'll tell you what, because I love those guys, and you can probably hear the energy in my voice when I'm still talking about it. It was the culture of where I worked that was more important than the work itself. And so if I were to sit down with anybody, I would say, do you like the people here, or do you like being here? And if the answer is no, man, then you have a cultural problem and something that you need to fix. And here's an important statement for anybody listening, and maybe we should have defined this early. Whether you think you have a culture or not, you're wrong. You have a culture. Wherever you work, your home, your business, your team, it has a culture. And if you didn't define it and you didn't help engineer it, then man, beware, because it just turned into whatever it wanted to be. And if it's a negative, toxic culture, that's the one you've got. If it somehow became an incredible positive and culture of appreciation, wow, you lucked out if it just happened like that. But what I'm trying to, I guess, create for everybody is you don't get the one you wish for, you get the one you design. And I made those mistakes just wishing in my office, like, oh, I wish it was great here. It's not, but I just wish it would turn around. No, that's the job of the leader or the parent or the coach. And if you do it right, man, your people, they won't just work hard for you. Like we talk about, they'll run through brick walls for you. And that's a culture everybody wants to be part of.
I love that you touched on that last part is running through a brick wall. It's a phrase that I think gets thrown around a lot in sports world, but also business. But going back to something you touched on the book is having fun at what you do. And I want to define that because for listeners, anybody that reads that, you'll obviously get a further expansion of what I'm saying. But it's okay to work hard. It's okay to have a good company, a good team, a good school, a good organization. But it's also okay to have fun while you're working. And I think that's something that a lot of people miss in this, what I call it's the 0 or 100 world we're in, where it's everything's great or everything's horrible. And I think, it's interesting because that's not the way I grew up. I grew up that, it doesn't have to be 0 or 100. And I think a lot of people, especially in the sports world, it's like, look, we're not here to make friends. We're not here to have fun. We're here to win a game. And yes, technically that's your definition. And if you're not winning games as a coach or as a staff, you're probably going to have to find a new job. But on the other side of the coin, I always say, well, what if you were a successful company? Or what if you also won? But what if the kids or the team company also had fun along the way? And I think that's something that we miss in today's world. And you touched on it nicely in the book. And I just wanted to ask if you wouldn't mind briefly expanding on the concept of fun.
Yeah, well, and it's funny you say that because as I was writing the book and fleshing it out, and which, by the way, as you know, took years to do, as I was really mapping out the ultimate roadmap to culture, what I really saw at the end, and it's funny that you say that, is the final ingredient or the final piece. If you've got the ultimate lagging indicator of a great culture, yes, there is trust. Yes, there is hard work and ethic and victories, like you said. But that last piece was it fun? And it's funny you bring that up because that therapy company that I talked about, I had so much fun with those guys. Like that's what we were doing every day. We were pranking on each other and we just had a blast. And I think that's this ingredient that we miss. But one example I'll give now from the sports world, I worked with a high school football team called Wayne Hills, and for a decade, right? And every summer we would meet with the coaches, we would meet with the team, and it's a lot of the roadmap of High 10. We would have our slogans, we would know where we were going, we knew our goals. And I'll tell you what, you said it, we worked hard. Like there's no doubt, man, did we work hard. But the whole thing is, we were having fun along the way. And it's pretty interesting that this was just a public school. You didn't recruit or get kids. And we had the second longest winning streak in New Jersey state history, won 55 in a row. So for 6 years, we didn't lose a game, right? And then we did lose one because we had to play a private school, but then we won another 20 straight. So it could have been like 80 in a row. And the whole thing was, when the kids write me, and they still write me today, like, they don't write about the hard work, and they don't write about, quote unquote, the suck of the training and all the things we did. They write about how much fun it was and how much fun it was to win and play together. And I think that is the final, it is this, not only, I guess you could either say ingredient or byproduct, but if you don't have it, you're probably going to look back someday in a less than positive fashion on it. So, as I described it in the book, remember how it shows that like the startup starts, that they're just having a lot of fun too. And that created this connection between everybody. And yeah, so I don't mean fun like you're doing jokes and ha ha, but I don't know, is everybody enjoying their work and it's just a great experience together? And that can happen anywhere, right? You could be at a Starbucks and they're having fun, or you could probably be at one and it's a nightmare and nobody likes working together within even the same company. So it is again, the job description, if you are a leader, to make sure you're providing those elements of the culture and supporting it. And if you aren't, beware of competing against the company or place that does. And hopefully that explains it a little
No, that was so good, and hopefully our listeners are paying attention. I have to ask this because based on what you said, is we worked hard, we put the work, and we worked incredibly hard, but we had fun as well. There's that saying, and I forget who said it, but if you find what you love to do, you'll never have to work a day in your life. And conceptually, that concept for me just always irked me because I love a lot of what I do. I absolutely love it. And it's what I want to do. I believe it's what I was put on this earth to do. But I still work hard at it. And yeah. I think that's for me that, if you find what you love to do, you'll never work a day in your life. And I think it to me, that never made sense because people that I looked up to, people that I, followed, I saw a bunch of them having a lot of fun, smiling, celebrating. But I also saw a bunch of them, the hard work behind the scenes. So maybe if you could just touch on that quote, that's threw a nice curveball at you.
I would agree with you because I pride myself in the amount of work and pain and suffering that has gone into all the different stuff that I have achieved. But here's one I'll say that might even be a bigger breakthrough. And I was just having this conversation this week with a professional sports coach, and we had a big breakthrough. You're going to like this one. I like to say, if you find the thing you're super interested in, all of a sudden your talents will be honed and you will have boundless energy to do the work. So the whole thing is, I guess it's not, find what you love and it's never work. No, find what you love and you'll do the work. Like you won't mind the work. You'll actually love the work or you'll embrace the work, but it's not that you didn't do the work or it isn't work. You're going to love, you'll be glad to do the work. And then when the hard, super hard work is done, you'll love it even more. So maybe that would be, if we could figure out a short way to say it, that would be the breakthrough. But yeah, for anybody listening though, and you'll love this one, Chris, because this is advice I give a lot. Hey, don't do something you don't love though. So wait a minute. You're going to tell me you have a career you don't like so you can get money to do something for an hour on the weekend you do like? Then you're blowing it, right? Like then the work is work and you're suffering. So don't get good at something you don't love. But if you are chasing the thing that you do love, then you'll just find more energy to do the massive amount of work it takes to be successful. And I don't know. And because I've done both, I've had jobs in both areas, man, I could never go back to doing something I didn't love, which brings up, how you just brought up the that idea of it's never work, which I think we dispelled. Here's one I hear a lot too. I'm grinding. A lot of people tell me, oh man, I'm grinding. And this would be the opposite. So now they're saying, I am working so hard. But when I hear the word grind, that means you're wearing yourself down, right? Like if you're going to grind some keys out or grind something, you're wearing yourself down. So I will also say, if somebody prides themselves on saying they're grinding, it's probably not something they love. It's probably now they're trying to take pride in just doing a lot of work. And I don't agree with that. So maybe that would be the one. If you love what you do, you're going to work hard, but you probably won't say you're being ground down, right? And I think I did hint about that in the book too.
I love that. So changing lanes for a second about books, and I have to, full and fair disclosure to our audience, I have in my office 3.5 bookshelves that are completely filled, and Martin turned the camera around before we went live, and he's got 5 bookshelves, and he reads, as he said, about 120 books a year, which is exactly what I did last year. I'm on pace, I think, for that this year. So I have to ask you, is there anything that you currently are reading or you've read recently that you'd like to recommend to our listeners in addition to Your Books Don't Count?
Wow. Yeah. So we could have walked out there again to see what it is, where I like to kind of do deep dives. And for everybody listening, hey, when anybody recommends a book, it's hard because it's an investment in your time, it's an investment in your money. And so I always say you should choose very wisely. Do your research and make sure this is the book for you. And if you start reading it and it's not the book for you, don't churn through, don't grind it out when there could be another book that you could be reading. And these are all, that could be another whole seminar about how to read a book and how to choose a book. But man, hang on. I'm going to walk out there right now and see, because I have my most recent list and I want to pick the best one for somebody listening. And why I say that is because when you are choosing a book for somebody, I take that very seriously, where I worry and I want to see what has been maybe. Well, here's one. If anybody likes a sports story, let me pull this down. I don't know if you've read this one. This just got sent to me. It's called 12 Mighty Orphans. I never knew this story. So this is a true sports story by the guy that wrote Junction Boys. This I just read last week. Super, super cool. And an amazing football sports story that I knew nothing about. That was really, really neat.
Going back to what you said, which is interesting, and I've never heard it worded the way you just said, is when you recommend a book, it's both that person's time and money. And what I always find interesting too is if someone recommends a book, and then I'll say, "Oh, did you just read that?" And say, "Oh, I haven't read it yet, but I've heard about it." And I'm kind of like, that's like
No.
that's like saying, "Oh, I have a great family, vacation for you. You'll love it." And say, "Oh, when did you guys go?" Like, "Oh, we haven't gone,
Never.
but I think, or I've heard about it." So that's a really interesting.
But yeah, so I
point when you
just
think
read
about
that one last week, and it was, if you like, just an interesting story, but it's this part of history, and I didn't know about it. So what I did, because my daughter is going to Notre Dame, and you'll like this, I've tried to read, last year was every book that I could find about Notre Dame. And I have a dozen books just on Newt Rockne and his coaching, but I bought all these ones from the 20s and 30s that were written about him. And so I guess it's what are you interested in and what are you deep diving into, right? And and I will be honest about this too. Recently, I have been reading a lot of fiction, and I've never done that before, but it's because I want to learn to be a better writer. And if anybody's interested in that in particular, I read it every year. It's Stephen King's book called On Writing, and it actually talks about his creative writing process and how he does it. It's a little scary because he's a scary guy, but the whole thing is I'm now reading about writing. I'm now reading about authors and how they come up with their ideas. Because as Chris and I were talking offline, I never considered myself an author or a writer, but I'm trying to now. And I'm just seeing how much of a craft that is and how much work goes into it. And I definitely tried to do that with High 10 because I had so much more time on my hands during the pandemic. And it was time well spent because I feel I really put something together that I'm proud to send out to the world.
No, and I couldn't agree more. And I think when you take a deep dive into a book or a topic, but in the regard to Stephen King, he's got a very interesting mind, but he's been unbelievably successful. So kudos to you for diving into that, because at the end of the day, whether you write the same style or genre is irrelevant when you look at actually becoming a better writer, a better fiction or storyteller. So I think that's really interesting. A fun question we've asked only the last probably year or so, and I know the quote by Jim Rohn, "You are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with." If I could grant you dinner with any 5 people, dead or alive, and you could level up with them, who would you pick?
Wow. Well, right off the bat, first one, and I thought you were going to ask who my 5 were, and I was already going on that one. One, right off the bat, who I would love to meet is Teddy Roosevelt. So he is my favorite president. I've read a lot of books about him. And, I would, you just want to see if he's legit. Here's a guy that brought like boxing and jujitsu, which are 2 passions of mine and things I've been involved with, into the White House. And another great book, if anybody would ever want to read it, it's called The River of Doubt. And that one, if you like, because I also like a lot of kind of biographies, but adventures. And man, that was him mapping out rivers that had never been traversed in the Amazon. And, so this guy was hardcore. So definitely he would be, I would say probably at the top of my list, but do I have to name Do I got to name 4 more?
Yep, you're on the spot here.
I would like to meet Newt Rockney without a doubt, because I just read so many books about him, and
I was about
he
to say
just
you could probably tell him things about himself he
well,
forgot
I
or
want to
didn't
hear,
know.
but you know how it is. You want to hear, like, was this really true, or this story? But for everybody listening, he not only put Notre Dame on the map. There would be no Notre Dame without Newt Rockney, and I don't think anybody argues that. But there may not be football, or in particular college football, and just what he did. If everybody understands, from inventing colored jerseys to equipment to a traveling schedule and having stadiums built. When you read when you really get into the nitty gritty of it, that I think is really, really incredible. Here's another one. And this is just I was having this conversation with my dad. I would like to meet Ernest Hemingway, from the writing perspective. I've been to his home in Key West. I've kind of followed him. And, he was another one that was an incredible adventurer. But I've read his books on writing as well. And I want to, you know what I mean? I want to hear, like, I want to see if he's really everything you read when you never met the guy. I want to know if it's, if it is really that person or not. You know what I mean? So we got a coach, we got a leader, we have here would be another one then. Here'd be another one. Speaking of culture and coaching, I would like to meet Vince Lombardi, right? Again, same thing. I read so many things about him. I think there were many things that I loved about his style, but I believe his style probably could not exist today. He would be probably fired in a minute. He wouldn't last like 2 seconds. But I think, unfortunately, he was still like Rockney before the day of so much video or social media or everything else that you really can't get your hands on everything. And then last one that I think I wish if there would have been a name that I could have had on my book, or if somebody could have read Coach to Coach, that I would have loved to have seen what he would have thought, it would have been Coach John Wooden. And because same thing, I got more than a dozen books about him. Now, most of the books, I'll tell everybody, they all tell the same stories. I think I've always been on this hunt that there's going to be this magical story that appears once you've exhausted them, because you just love the stuff you hear so much. And I don't think there is that book anymore. But I always heard, and I've talked to certain people, that if you just went to the diner that he was always at, he'd sit down with you and like have lunch with you and talk to you. And I'll tell you what, I think there was just stuff, if I could have had a conversation with him, that there would have been even more to pull out. And so that's a short list of the 5. I know there would be a whole lot more too, but so I have never been asked that question before, but hopefully if you call that, you'll like this one. Sometimes they call it your Mount Everest. Like, who would be your Mount Everest? But that's 4. I gave you 5. But if it were just coaching, I don't think you could go wrong with Rockney, Lombardi, and Wooden right there. So that would be a good one.
That's a good list. And I'll take a side note here for a second. I actually had the opportunity to have dinner with Coach Wooden back in 2005, and it was my parents and I, John Wooden, his publicist, and his publicist's girlfriend, who I believe became his wife. And we had a fascinating dinner. And then we're at a restaurant. He asked us to come back to his house, which was amazing. So it was all in total, about 3.5, almost 4 hours. Just an amazing night. But I have to share this because it's a very funny story. So I'm a huge fanatic of the movie A Few Good Men. If anybody asks me what's my favorite movie, there's to me, it's A Few Good Men and everything else. Also, a side note, most people don't know you can actually break a DVD by watching it too many times. So that's actually a fact, and I did that to my first Few Good Men DVD. But when we sit down with Coach Wooden, my mom, who never played sports, 2 minutes into dinner is calling him coach, and we were talking about sports, music, entertainment, and my parents knew I was going to ask, and we went over to the movie topic, and I said, Coach, I have to ask, but have you ever seen the movie A Few Good Men? And he said, Chris, he said, I have. He said, a fantastic movie. He said, it's on very frequent on TNT and TBS, which it literally is like once a day. And then we changed topics. And I kid you not, at the time, he was 94 years old, I believe. Like 10 minutes later, he leaned over to me and he said, Chris, he startled me. He put his hand on my forearm and I said, yes, coach. And he points at me and he says, you can't handle the truth. So not only was he unbelievably witty and smart, but he was reciting poems from 40 years ago.
Yeah, that's the piece you see, because I believe he taught English, and that, and his father instilled this passion of learning. But that is, and he wrote a lot of poetry and different stuff too, that when you see, I mean, this was an educated guy. And, yeah, like I said, that is one of the regrets that I know. He would have been somebody that would have either read the book, or I would have loved to have seen what he thought, and got that philosophy on coaching. And I think nobody ever distilled out, like every book about him is essentially stories about him or his pyramid, but it's never, I think there could have been the ultimate coaching manual that could have been created by that guy. And that never happened, because it was more just the stories of what he did versus the process of how he did it, and you can kind of try to piece it together, whether it was his note cards and his planning, or putting on the socks at the first practice, or how he ran things. But
so yeah, I love it. I just off of the last 20 seconds, I know you've definitely read a bunch about him, because that's what I think made him
I've read
great.
all of it. Like that's what I mean. Yeah. In particular, so last year, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar just came out with a book about him.
Yep.
And I think it's called Coach and Me. And that was, I guess, the last one I've read, because it just came out. So there are always still things. And each time you get another little new nugget or something from somebody's perspective. But unfortunately, soon, all, that stuff will all be lost to history.
Yeah, no. And I think that goes back to your point about, the value of books, because you talked about a Teddy Roosevelt book that was written, so long ago, but because it was written, you can read it now, I can read it now. So have to ask you, in today's day and age, there's a bunch of negativity out there, and I'm curious if there's one or two people that you could recommend that either you follow on social media or in general that are just putting out really good content and uplifting stuff that you'd like to recommend possibly for our listeners.
Yeah, well, definitely one of those, would be if anybody's into sales stuff or, marketing, all different things like that. It's a good friend of mine. His name is Jeffrey Gittimer. And without Jeffrey, I mean, he's just one of the most generous and nicest guys. He has mentored me. I moved down here to Charlotte from New Jersey almost a decade ago. And we had a meeting. It was the first meeting I had with anybody when I was here, because everybody said, you got to meet this guy. That meeting turned into a 6-hour meeting, and we talk multiple times a week, every week since. And he taught me a lot about just being generous, helpful, and just always putting it out there. And that's what he does. So without a doubt, I would say that. And then I guess a shout out to somebody you and I both talked about. Also, it would be John Gordon, where I'm always looking at his stuff. And, he's another person that helped me out. And, we have the same publisher, but I reached out to him and just said, hey, can you, do you have advice or different ideas? And he always did. And he's always been so helpful where he didn't have to be. But when you see the information that he's putting out there, it's pretty prolific now. You and I talked about how fast he's coming out with stuff, but definitely he's always got some great information for people.
And then for our listeners who would like to connect with you, follow you, or find out more about you, but also where's the best way they can find you, as well as get a copy or 2 or 3 or 5 of your books?
Yeah, for your staff. Well, hey, the books are available on Amazon. They are in Kindle, audio, everything. So any version you like to digest your stuff, it doesn't just have to be reading. It's there for you. And like Chris said, I just believe they're stories, but the information that's in there, it's all real. And it's helped so many people so far. I hope you give it a shot. I'm the Martin Rooney on Instagram. I'm always putting content out there. You can see a lot about me, my life, my business. You can go to my website, coachinggreatness.com. There's lots of information there and blogs about some of the information we talked about today. And if you want to see about my company, it's trainingforwarriors.com. And there's a lot of neat stuff there too. But and worst case scenario, you can just hit Martin Rooney on Google and images, and you'll see a lot of crazy stuff, and then you'll realize most of the stuff I said today is pretty true. That just means I'm old. Right?
You're not old. Stop that. And last question we have for you is if you have any parting words you'd like to leave with our listeners today.
Wow. Well, here's one that really stands out for me, and this comes from Coach to Coach, which was hopefully the biggest thing that I wanted people to get from that book. I think it's the heart that beats that book. And if I were to challenge anybody right now, if you want to be a leader, if you want to be a coach, if you want to be a parent, or you want to move ahead in business or in life, you have to develop one skill. And that skill is to be able to allow yourself to get as excited or more excited about somebody else and their success than you are about your own. And I really believe that with the internet now, there could be the biggest opportunity ever to do that. But I don't think most people do. I think most people, when they go to the internet, they see somebody else's life or they see somebody else has done something good. And it's as if there's less good for them. So now we're angry. We've compared it and it's stolen our joy, right? And I just want to be this reminder for everybody that, guys, like there's enough good to go around. And if you can get excited about somebody else's great achievements, it's only going to probably bring more back to you. And it's a skill I rarely see, but the most successful people that I know, they have it, right? And again, like Chris and I were talking, I'm like, hey, man, you got these books, you got more books coming. That's awesome. Like, I want to hear about them. What do I got to do? Versus, oh man, he's coming out with a book, then that means somebody can't buy my book. And no, that's a really small, scarce way to think. And if you think like that, it's probably going to hold you back. So that, and as a coach, remember, it's about them, not you. So you got to have that ability to get excited about their success because that's what you're there for in the first place.
I don't think we could have had a better way to end today's conversation. And typically I end each episode and I thank the guest and say, I hope we can connect again soon. But because we became best friends, I know that we will connect again soon. But I truly appreciate it. And again, for you guys that are looking for a good read, a very uplifting read in a bunch of ways, I would say don't get one of the books, but get both the books, Coach to Coach and High 10. And again, I know that we're going to connect soon because we are best friends now.
There's no doubt about it, Chris. And my pleasure. And hey, I hope everybody, hey, if you liked it, tell Chris. So then he has me on again. And then we can cover, we're just scratching the surface, people. So I'm ready.
Thank you for listening to episode number 350. I'm so glad that Martin was able to join us. He shared some really great stuff with us today, and I challenge you to take one or two things and put them into action right now. Don't forget to go crush your day, and remember, we rise by lifting others up. And lastly, to our listeners, thank you. We truly appreciate your time, and we hope our episodes inspire you to keep on attacking life and never giving up. To quote Dr. Norman Vincent Peale, it's always too early to quit.